Prime Minister, what message do you send a beleaguered child in Aleppo suffering the constant bombardment by Russian and Syrian jets day by day?
Well, first of all, the scenes that we're seeing from Aleppo are absolutely heartbreaking. And the levels of violence that are taking place, the way in which the Syrian regime is indiscriminately bombing its own civilians, of course, make it very difficult for a political transition to be discussed. But that's what we must continue to work on. We must continue to work on bringing the parties together in Geneva so that we can see a political solution, which is the only long-term solution we will have to the problems in Syria. But alongside that, we will continue to put pressure on all parties to ensure that humanitarian aid can get through to these beleaguered civilians. I mean, the policy that the Syrian regime has of starve or surrender is absolutely appalling.
The Russians and the Americans are no longer talking. Do we have a track to the Russians?
You're right that the talks between the Russians and the Americans have broken down. We continue to call for a ceasefire, and a ceasefire that can be sustainable so the parties can come together and work on that political transition, which we believe is absolutely essential for that long-term political solution in Syria. We will continue to work with international partners on that to try and find a way through this appalling situation, recognising all the time that it is people in Syria, people in Aleppo, who are suffering day by day.
But in truth, Britain has no real hand in this. There's nothing Britain can do.
Now, Britain has been playing its role. I mean, first of all, of course, the UK has been at the forefront of those who've been providing humanitarian aid for the refugees who've been fleeing Syria, providing humanitarian aid in the region. We're the second biggest bilateral donor. There are children being educated, there are medical supplies, food and water being supplied as a result of what the British taxpayer is doing. We also have been playing our role in the political and diplomatic efforts that have taken place in order to deal with the situation. Only a couple of weeks ago, it was here in London that we hosted opposition parties from Syria setting out their vision of the future of Syria. So the UK is playing its role, but what is key to this is that the Syrian regime stops bombing its own civilians indiscriminately in the way that it is, causing such suffering and hardship to its own people, and that Russia understands that we need to get humanitarian aid through. If Russia was to agree and to work for a ceasefire, then the parties could sit down and could start to work for the political transition that can bring the long-term solution.
Now, Prime Minister, you were elected in 2015 on a manifesto which pledged, "We are clear that what we want from Europe, we say yes to the single market." What mandate do you have to break that commitment?
Well, on the 23rd of June this year, the British people were asked to give their voice, to give their view as to whether or not the United Kingdom should stay in the European Union. Parliament was clear. It voted 6-1 to give that choice, that voice to the British people. They came back with a clear message that they want the UK to leave the European Union.
Yeah, but the single market was not the question, was it?
They want the UK to leave the European Union, and that is what we are doing. What we now need to do is to negotiate the relationship that the UK will have with the EU once we have left. I want that relationship to be one in which there's the maximum possible opportunity for British businesses to trade with and operate within the single market in the European Union. But this is not about the UK saying what bits of membership do we want to keep. It's about saying we will be an independent country outside the EU. What is the right relationship for us to have with the EU?
When it comes to those negotiations, why shouldn't Parliament be involved? It's surely for Parliament to determine what sorts of bits of the European Union we somehow want to retain a relationship with.
Well, we will be having, as I have recently announced, we're going to be putting before Parliament a great repeal bill which will set out the repeal of the European Communities Act, bring European Union law into UK law, so at the point at which we leave the EU, nobody will be in any doubt. Employers, workers will know what the situation is in relation to those laws.
But it feels very imperious at the moment, Prime Minister. And at the moment, apparently, even before your statement on Sunday, there was a very cursory ring round of cabinet members as to what you were actually going to say. There doesn't seem really to be very much democratic involvement in the actual detail of what you're doing.
Well, first of all, in looking at how we're going to negotiate leaving the European Union, I've created a new government department with the Secretary of State that will be focusing its efforts on that. We have a new cabinet subcommittee which brings Secretaries of State together from a number of different departments to discuss how we approach this, to look at the process that we're following, to consider what we're hearing from sectors of industry, from businesses and others around the country, and from all parts of the United Kingdom, from the devolved administrations too.
But you
so
could
everybody
argue
is fully engaged in the process of determining what the UK government is going to be putting before, doing in terms of the negotiations. But the negotiating party here is the UK government.
Well, you could argue that 48% didn't vote for this. How are they to be recompensed?
Well, of course, there were those here in the United Kingdom who voted to remain rather than to leave. But the majority vote was to leave the European Union. And you know, as I talk to people around the country, as I talk to businesses and I talk to members of the public, the overwhelming message I get from people is that the vote has taken place, a clear message has been given to the politicians to ensure that the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, and they want us to get on with it, and that's exactly what this government will do.
Final question, Prime Minister. The pound is down, back to the sort of levels it was at the time of the vote. The IMF have just downgraded the expectation for British growth next year. Is that what the Chancellor was describing as turbulence?
Well, the IMF have upgraded growth for the UK economy for this year, and they have made the point that
but you know better
actually,
than it's for next year that's the worry.
But they have also made the point that the reaction to the Brexit vote, to the referendum on June the 23rd, was actually reassuringly orderly, that it has been more orderly than I think many had predicted. But both the Chancellor and I have been clear that this is not going to be plain sailing in the future. There will be ups and downs, there will be some bumps in the road ahead. When we can, we will be giving the certainty to people, as I have done this week. I've explained that we will be triggering the Article 50 that starts the formal negotiation process with the EU by the end of March next year. I've explained what will happen to EU law at the point at which we leave, to give some certainty to employers and employees about what the situation will be. But we need to go out there and negotiate the best deal for the UK and be ambitious in doing that. I'm going to make a success of this. The UK people expect nothing less.
Prime Minister, thank you very much for talking to us.